Glad to have you with us. College football playoff top 25. Reese Davis here with Kirk Herbstreit, Joey Galloway, David Pollack, and Jesse Palmer. Guys, let's crank it up by looking at the AP top 10 poll. Still a couple of weeks away from seeing the committee's rankings. Alabama's still number one, but you have a lot of change. West Virginia, Washington, Penn State gone from last week. Georgia dropped. You see LSU and Michigan making moves. UCF sitting in the top 10. So with all of the upsets, the surprises, and still some time to go. Kirk, let's start with you. What's your biggest takeaway from what we've seen in Week 7?
Wow, that's the week we were all kind of anticipating and wondering when it might hit. We just didn't think it would be maybe this past week. The takeaway for me is that out west, the Washington Huskies are now out of the playoff picture. In the Big Ten, Penn State, who had a real chance with the 1-point loss to Ohio State, if they could have won out, they would have maybe had an argument there at the end of the year, even if they missed the Big Ten championship game. They're now out of that discussion. And all I know is this LSU team, every single time we all want to doubt them, they somehow rally the troops and go out and play great football and keep themselves right in position to have a huge year.
Kirk, it's a great reminder that when we start talking about all these teams going undefeated, this is a great weekend to remind us that it doesn't happen very often. And it's the reason why Penn State, Michigan State is a perfect example. What does Michigan State have to lose in that ball game? Couple fake kicks, doesn't really matter. Down the stretch, we're going to see more of this. This is why we'll have 1 or 2 undefeated teams max, because this kind of stuff will come down the stretch when people have nothing to lose and they'll just go gangbusters.
And, David, my biggest takeaway was that Michigan and LSU are legit playoff contenders. I know on everybody's list they sort of have Alabama and Ohio State sitting at 1-2, but I was really impressed with how good Michigan looked against Wisconsin, and then conversely, how good LSU looked at home against the defending SEC champions just a week after they lost on the road to Florida. Physical teams that want to run the ball, that are playing good defense, and the more Shea Patterson, the more Joe Burrow really get comfortable in their offense and keep improving week in, week out. These are legit contenders. I watched that Michigan game thinking to myself, if Michigan wins out, if they play like that, the way they did against Wisconsin, they can win at Ohio State at the end of the year.
Yep.
If LSU plays like that in a couple weeks, November 3rd, at home against Alabama, they're going to give Alabama a run. We all kind of got Bama and Ohio State 1-2, but they're not unbeatable, especially from those two teams if they play as well as they did this past weekend.
Jess, we don't all have Alabama and Ohio State number 2, and for the very reason that Ohio State doesn't look unbeatable to me. And then watching the statement that Michigan made against Wisconsin, and Wisconsin isn't a great team by any stretch, but what Michigan did was they beat them badly, and they dominated them. And so if a team is going to play a team like Wisconsin and make a statement the way Michigan did, they've closed that gap against Ohio State. And now they're sitting in a position that if they run the table, then they should be in. All the teams that last week and for the entire season I said would go undefeated, because I always pick teams to go undefeated, they're still sitting there. I mean, the top 3 teams are still sitting there with a chance to go undefeated in this thing. And if they do, they'll be in. But, you know, as far as a takeaway for me, I was very impressed by Michigan. LSU, you just don't know what to say. One week they lose to Florida, next week they come back and stomp out Georgia. You just don't know how to read them. But the Pac-12, not looking good at all.
I would agree with that, Joey, but the one thing I would like to hear from you and Jesse, both of you have Texas at number 5, and Texas has as good a win as anybody has in beating Oklahoma. But why Texas number 5? They sort of escaped this past week, too. Why didn't Michigan make a bigger jump for you, or LSU maybe? I know you're only talking a couple spots, and it'll work itself out. Joey, start.
I would say for Texas, to have Ellinger go out of the game and win, to me is impressive. And in the same way when Clemson lost Trevor Lawrence and Kelly Bryant in 1 week, went to their third quarterback and beat Syracuse. I don't mind close games. If you put up a close game, it doesn't bother me as far as the rankings are concerned until you do it a couple times in a row in a season. Then I start to get my eyebrows raised a little bit and get a concern. But as far as Texas right now, with their loss being to Maryland to begin the season, and now they've gone on this stretch run with, you mentioned the Oklahoma win, that's why I feel pretty comfortable with Texas sitting at number 5. LSU, their loss to Florida is way too fresh for me, just 2 weeks removed. And so that's why, to me, I'm comfortable putting Texas at number 5.
Yeah, I think I'm also convinced. To me, I think Texas's win against Oklahoma was very, very impressive. I also think Texas's win against USC is starting to look a little bit better now as we go on in the season. I'm not taking anything away from what Michigan did against Wisconsin. That's probably their best win. I don't know how good Wisconsin really is after losing to BYU at home. And for LSU, and the win against Georgia, as good as it looked, obviously what we kept talking about with Georgia was, who are they? Where have they been tested? Was it South Carolina early? Are they really this good of a football team? We don't know. And I think you can make an argument for all those teams being in the 5 spot right now. But I do, with Joey, give Texas credit for winning with a backup quarterback against Baylor. That's a big reason why I've got Texas.
My God, what does LSU have to do for you guys? I mean, look at what they've played so far. And how can we not think about that team being one of the top 4 teams or 5 teams in the country? I don't get that. I don't get how you put a one-loss team ahead of LSU and what they've done so far. You know what they remind me of? They remind me of the Alabama championship teams before Tua. Play great defense, run the football, and do enough at the quarterback spot to get wins. That's the biggest disagreement for me. I don't understand how you guys wouldn't have LSU higher. That makes no sense to me.
I'll tell you how I think Michigan's better. I think Michigan's better than LSU. I just think they're better than LSU. Kirk?
That's cool. I just don't know how Sam Ehlinger having to go out against Baylor and winning that game outweighs what LSU did by beating Miami on a neutral site, going to Jordan-Hare when Auburn still had a pulse, knocking off Jesse's team there on the road was an impressive win, and then what they did against Georgia. I mean, that to me separates, even though they had a narrow loss against Florida on the road. I think LSU, for me personally, they're at 5 and they're knocking on the door. Of course, all this will take care of itself if LSU is going to continue to win games, including a game against Alabama. But as we sit here right now, after my 4, I would have LSU definitely at 5 and Michigan sitting there at 6.
Okay, we're talking about all of these teams sitting there in that 4, 5, 6 margin. And when I say I think Michigan's better than LSU, I'm talking by a hair. What LSU's done is as impressive as anything that's happened in the country. Joey, let me ask you this. Tua Tagovailoa is slow to get up. Game against Missouri, they say he could have come back into the game. But it does hint at how different Alabama would be if they didn't have Tua. How concerned are you about the injury, the possibility of maybe Tua not being as sharp? Because, some were saying footwork issues because of the knee, different things, that he wasn't quite as lethal, though he still threw 3 touchdowns, as he has been earlier in the season. Any concern there?
No concern whatsoever. Reese, honestly, any one of the 5 people on this show right now could play quarterback for Alabama and go win football games. We act like the game was closer than it was. There was at no point in time in this game, whether it was Tua, whether it was Jalen Hurts at quarterback, where there was a concern that Alabama might lose the game. And they're the only team that I've watched play this season that can make that statement. We have not seen one time, no matter what has happened, no matter who has gone out, when Ruggs went out of the game, when Tua slid, went out of the game, there's been no point in time we've seen a time when we thought, hey, Alabama could lose this game late. It just didn't happen. I'm not concerned.
See, to me, it's a much bigger discussion. It's not about whether or not Alabama is still the #1 team if Jalen Hurts goes in. We've been talking about them like they're the greatest team in the history of college football, and a lot of that has to do with what you always see from Alabama, which is the defense, the running game, the physicality, the mental toughness, and the Tua factor. Like, to me, the Tua factor takes them, it's like being able to have a turbo button in a video game and the other guy doesn't have a turbo button. That just takes them to a whole different level of greatness. And so his injury is important. I talked to some folks internally at Alabama today who are it's not just lip service when they say he's okay, he's stronger this week than he was last week. Everything that I'm hearing, he's okay and he's going to play. It's not like, should we play him or should we go with Jalen? Internally, they're like, we're going to play ball. We're going to Knoxville, playing a rivalry game, and Tua is a quarterback. So if he does ever come out, I don't think it's just about the injury. It would just be about giving Jalen an opportunity to go out and play. But this is a much bigger question than just is Tua's injury preventing them from still being considered the #1 team. Because if that's the question, the answer would be obviously they still are #1. But Jesse and David, I look at this as, is he going to be okay? They say he is okay, and because that's what keeps Alabama at a whole different level than discussing, just whether or not they should be #1 at all.
And it's his ability to improv which keeps him at a whole nother level, because very few quarterbacks. Listen, we know he can destroy you from the pocket. He can do that. We know he can run. But it's his ability to have that magic that we've seen with Johnny Manziel and Russell Wilson over the years. That's what makes Alabama unbeatable on the next level. If that's diminished, absolutely 100%, they come down to the field and they become a team that we're not talking about where, like Kirk said, or like we said last week, where it's Alabama and everybody else on the planet. So I would be very worried if I was Alabama fans. And another thing, too, guys, we know this over the years. It ain't like Nick Saban gives you off in practice. He's going to make you go out there and practice and compete and earn it. And sometimes just need a little bit of rest. And I would be monitoring Tua's knee, because it's a huge deal.
It's definitely a big deal. I think the one advantage they have, and I think we've kind of alluded to this, is that it's not just Tua on offense. I mean, we've seen Amari Cooper in years past there and Calvin Ridley. Have we ever seen a receiving group this good, this complete at Alabama since Nick Saban's been there? Julio Jones, they've had some really good star receivers, but when you look at Judy and Smith and Ruggs and Irv Smith at tight end, the list just goes on and on and on. They've got Waddle, they've got true freshmen rolling out in the field and making plays too. So it's not just Tua that helps make this offense as explosive as it's been. But I think one thing we knew even coming into the year, Alabama's schedule really set up for them this year too. It wasn't just the home games against A&M and Mississippi State and Auburn, but also think about Tua's injury right now and what they have coming up after Tennessee. They get a bye week. And that's critical for this team right now, that is a little bit banged up, to get to that, to get Tua healthy before that massive showdown with LSU early November.
I think the strength of record right now, it says how well you did against your schedule. Alabama's only 5th right now. It speaks to what you're talking about, Jesse. But the much sterner tests are to come for the Crimson Tide, possibly in a rivalry game on Saturday, more likely coming up at LSU. We'll talk a little bit about Notre Dame as Tua with SVP.
I'm fine. I got to go out to practice today. I'm a lot better, actually, than I was last week after the Arkansas game. It looked bad on the field. I just retweaked it kind of, but, you know, we got some treatment after the game following this morning, leading up to practice today. So we're a lot better. We're much better.
Always a team guy, isn't he? Talking about we're better. It's his knee. There's no we in there. Good to hear Tua saying that he's okay.
Hey, Judy disagrees.
That's a good one.
That's true, too. That's a very good point, guys. Here's the best chance to make the college football playoff. According to ESPN's playoff predictor, it is Clemson. By virtue of his schedule, though the Tigers have an undefeated NC State team coming in this weekend, they still have the best chance to make the playoff. It is time now for our blimp-worthy debate, brought to you by Goodyear. So the playoff predictor says Clemson is the biggest lock to make the playoff. Kirk, who do you think is the biggest lock to make the playoff?
I would agree with Clemson just because of the schedule. Alabama's the team that everybody's talking about clearly as the best team in the country, but they still have some tougher games to go, especially going to Death Valley, playing LSU in that atmosphere. And if they get through that, they still have a rivalry game with Auburn and then the SEC championship game in Atlanta. So I think you have to respect that. And because of that, after the way Miami has looked, you talk about a team up and down, up and down. I think Clemson, Joey, in my mind, has the easiest track, and if we were sitting here like this and trying to figure out who's going to be unbeaten, I would give Clemson the best chance.
I feel very confident that Alabama's going to run their schedule. I don't see the LSU game as much of a challenge as other people do, because LSU still has that same issue that they've had for years now, and that's the ability to throw the ball. And I believe Alabama will exploit that. Schedule, absolutely, you're right. They have tougher teams on their schedule, but they're a better team. Clemson, the path looks very easy for them, but we have seen Clemson in the past drop one of those games. Last year it was Syracuse. This year is almost Syracuse again. But I think that if I was just calculating numbers and crunching numbers, I would say Clemson also. But the way Alabama's playing, I'll go with Alabama.
I'm going to go with Alabama too, Joey, and I've said it before. I think this is the best team Nick Saban has had. They just look completely dominant. If Tua is 100% healthy, I just don't think anybody beats them. And I think watching Georgia struggle this past weekend also made me think, you know, if that's the team Alabama has to beat in Atlanta, then that's obviously a very winnable game if, in fact, Georgia's not as good as maybe we thought heading into this past weekend. I totally get that Clemson is probably the easiest road to the playoff based on their schedule. Guys, I still have a question about starting a true freshman at quarterback each and every week. As good as Trevor Lawrence has looked and the arm talent and all the accolades he came into college with, I still believe true freshman quarterbacks are one game away from just having a turnover fest and a meltdown. And I think back to Clemson earlier this year playing games against Texas A&M or Syracuse. Trevor Lawrence struggled in those games against a good pass rush. There's still some games left on their schedule, Florida State, Boston College, maybe by Miami in the ACC title game, where they have good defensive lines and good pass rushes that could affect Trevor Lawrence and maybe manifest itself into an upset loss. So I'm not as sold that Clemson is just a guaranteed breeze through only because of their schedule.
Did you just gloss over NC State and just give them the dub this week against NC State?
No. I think NC State could definitely win that game. Yeah.
I mean, and I think this is the biggest challenge for Clemson the rest of the way, because NC State, I think, can do what you're saying. They can make Trevor Lawrence beat them through the air. I think they're physical enough up front. They're good. They're good tackling defense. They're disciplined enough that I think this week, and for that purpose, I would agree. I think Alabama is the team that I expect to be the one that runs the table. I think Clemson's got a few more challenges on their hands coming up that will take all they need.
David, just go back to what Jesse was saying. I get it, but I think the true freshman thing is something that no longer is an issue. I mean, we've seen Jalen Hurts, what he did as a true freshman. He's able to get to a national championship, came up a little bit short. We saw Jake Fromm. We saw Tua. I mean, I just think that these style of offenses, most of these guys are playing a similar style. In his case, when he was in high school for 4 years, playing this exact same offense. So while it's only natural to wait for that true freshman moment, and he could have it, I just think the game has evolved with these systems, and it's just turnkey for a lot of these guys because it's a carry-on from where they were in high school. And Georgia, as bad as they looked against LSU, let's not forget just last year, Georgia went to Jordan-Hare. It could not have looked any worse for them up front in the trenches. And then 2 weeks later, we saw what they did, and a completely different emotion and a different attitude where they played like they were backed into a corner, and then they carried that out against Oklahoma and then almost able to beat Alabama. So just because Georgia looked really bad against LSU, I don't think that means, okay, that's who Georgia is. They stink. Enough of them. Teams bounce back and evolve, and I just don't think it was a bad outing, but it doesn't mean that that's who they are.
Hey, Kirk,
I think a lot of teams are inconsistent. The thing about Alabama, they're very consistent. They bring their A-plus game. They blow people out.
Kirk hits this every week on game day, and he couldn't be more right about it. The emotion, maintaining your intensity, all of those things play such a huge role. How do you react when you come off big wins? So I know we can fall victim a little bit of that to say the performance that we saw in the Big House Saturday night from Michigan. David, you've been very strong about saying what else does LSU have to do, and I would totally agree with you that LSU is the most accomplished one-loss team. What I'm asking you is who the best one-loss team is. I give the edge to Michigan because I think there's a higher ceiling, and I think they're ascending. Do they have some questions? Sure. But who do you think is the best one-loss team right now?
What's your biggest question about Michigan, Reese?
I need to see if they can perform on the road the way they do at home, and I think they will. I think they will and they can.
And I might be alone in this, but I also think Shea Patterson, if you make him throw the football, can he be a guy that beats you? I think LSU's the same blueprint. Joe Burrow. Can you make him throw the football to beat you? But I think when you line up and you've done what LSU has done, I've already seen it on the road. I've seen it in different atmospheres. I've seen it at home with LSU, and they just attack and they keep coming. They're going for it on fourth down. I think there's a lot of belief amongst the locker room. I think the lines of scrimmage is really, really good for LSU. Their offensive line, I think, is actually now getting better, even though it's had 6 starting lineups up front. I just think that LSU, to me, what they've done so far this season, to me, it's very clear they're the best one-loss team in the country.
The LSU game against Florida seems to be getting glossed over in all of this conversation. And because it was so recent to me, it's fresh. And we've seen, now believe me, I can appreciate what they did against Georgia and the physicality and the way they ran them over. They put up 475 yards of offense, but 275 of it was running the football. And so it takes me back to that same issue. I like Texas as my best one-loss team out there. Reese, I am impressed by what Michigan did, and I got my eye on them. But right now, just like you said, if Texas was to line up, whether it's Michigan, whether it's LSU, I think Texas wins the game. I love what they're doing on the defensive side of the football, much more aggressive than we've seen any Big 12 team in recent history. And Sam Ehlinger, he's just a playmaker. It's not pretty, it's not shiny, it doesn't draw your attention, but somehow he finds a way to win games.
Joey, it wouldn't be a show if you and I didn't mix it up a little bit.
You're absolutely right.
You do realize that LSU lost to Florida, not Florida Gulf Coast. I mean,
Yes.
they're number 11 in the country, and it was a one-possession game. It's not like that's some kind of terrible loss.
Well, it's terrible in the idea of the reason why they lost. And so when you see LSU get put in that position to have to throw the ball to beat a football team, they've not been able to do it, not just this season, but in past seasons. It's becoming just what LSU is. So when they can run it, very good football team like they were against Georgia. When they face a good defensive football team that can slow them down running the football, and I know, Reese, before you say it, I am not allowed to look forward, but in a few weeks, they're going to play Alabama. And we will see, once again, if they can't run it, that they're going to have problems.
Get him.
Well, I mean, that is not fair to say when they go against Alabama, if they can't run it, they're going to have problems. Most people are going to have problems against Alabama. Joy, I think that Florida, the loss for LSU at Florida, I mean, this is when you start to talk about good losses. I think that the way Florida has improved, I think that is considered a good loss when you're debating all these teams. Texas had a Maryland loss early in the year. And I know for you it's what happened recently. For me, it's not. I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday. What the hell is Texas doing losing to Maryland for a second year in a row? It makes no sense to me. Now, they have improved since then. But to me, this is a debate between LSU and Michigan. And what's interesting about both of those teams is they both play great defense. It's going to come down to the quarterback play. It's going to come down to the offenses. Joe Burrow, you can look at his numbers and kind of roll your eyes and say he hasn't done anything. But if you've watched LSU play every week, which I know you guys have, he's made some plays that have provided sparks for their offense that makes you kind of feel that it's different this year than it's been in recent years at that position. So I think there's hope at that quarterback spot, and I think the receivers, a young group, continue to get better, led by Jefferson. But I just think in general, guys, I would give LSU an edge, only, Reese, because what they've accomplished. But as far as 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, that Michigan team, be anxious to see how they use the Wisconsin win as kind of a jump start to the second half of the season.
Hey, Joey, that same Texas defense you love, the one that gave up 40 to Oklahoma, right?
Yeah,
Paul,
the
who
one
wouldn't
that
give up 40 to Oklahoma?
Who hasn't given up 40
Everybody's
to
giving up
Oklahoma?
40 to Oklahoma. Come
Yeah,
on,
who's
man.
not giving up 40 to Oklahoma?
on.
That's like
There's
saying who
plenty
can't
of
run the
teams
ball
not giving
against
up
Bama
40.
is not a good running offense.
There's plenty of teams not giving up 40.
Dude, Jesse, you got last
listen,
word.
you play in the Big 12, man. We're giving up yards, and you're going to give up points. That's what's happening. I love what Todd Orlando's doing on defense too. That win against Oklahoma and outdoing Kyler Murray, who might win the Heisman Trophy. And by the way, guys, again, the win against USC. USC might win the Pac-12. That could be a very, very big win in their cap at the end of the year, too. I agree, the loss early against Maryland looked bad, but teams do improve. We talked about it last week. Ohio State did it back in 2014. They got better. I'm a big fan of Sam Ehlinger and how much he's improved in year two. So, I'm higher on Texas than I think both David and Kirk.
All right, let's see how well Ehlinger responds and how quickly he can get back on the field after hurting that shoulder against Baylor on Saturday. We're just rolling on here in College Football Playoff Top 25. If you beat Michigan in the past, Chase Winovich says you have.
Northwestern Mutual.
Notre Dame came so close to becoming one of the top 10 casualties. They trailed Pitt for much of the game on Saturday, but they were able to rally in the fourth quarter. Ian Book leading the win, 19-14. The Fighting Irish escaped the Panthers, who gave a valiant effort. And as a result of some of the other upsets, the AP Top 10 presented by Northwestern Mutual, you see the Fighting Irish. They have moved into the top 4. They presumably will stay there this week with their open date coming. But we thought that perhaps all of the close shaves for Notre Dame had been solved by changing quarterbacks. Now they have one, albeit coming off a couple of emotional games. Jesse, do you have more confidence in Notre Dame, or do you have more questions about the undefeated Irish?
Yeah, Reese, I was really confident about Notre Dame heading into that Virginia Tech game a couple weeks ago. Now, watching them the last two games, I'm starting to develop more questions, I think. I think my biggest concern for Notre Dame right now is pass protection on offense, on that offensive line. I obviously know that was a big question mark coming into the year. You lose a left tackle and your left guard, 2 top 10 picks in the NFL draft. Then the right tackle goes down for a season-ending injury. And you've watched them against Virginia Tech, and especially this past weekend against Pittsburgh, struggled to keep Ian Book standing up. He's been flushed around in the pocket, hasn't been able to play on rhythm, and I think it's so important for this explosive offense to be able to use Boykin and Claypool at 6'4" outside, and Finke in the slot, and Mack at tight end. They've got major weapons, but they got to keep Ian Book clean. That could come back to bite him down the road. Florida State, Syracuse, these are teams that can get after
USC
the quarterback.
At the end of the year.
USC, exactly. I mean, this is a problem. It's something I think we got to keep our eye on for Notre Dame.
I think cautious, I guess, because the thing is, like, you go back in the beginning of the season when Winbush was there, I think we all kind of had cautiousness and we weren't buying in. But Ian Book, this is the first bad performance by Ian Book this past week. He had 2 interceptions and he was running for his life. He fumbled once. They didn't lose it. But so I think I do have a little bit of concerns, but I think there's also a lot of teams in the country that we have concerns with. And when I look at their schedule down the stretch, they're going to have to be good offensively. Defensively, they're going to have to continue to get a little bit better. I'm cautious. I'm not saying they're automatically in by any stretch. I don't think anybody's going to do that, because I have seen some things, like especially this last week, I think that gives you pause for concern.
Hey, David, I don't think it's just foregone conclusion. This is the greatest team in the world type of thing. But for me,
Yeah.
I didn't lose any confidence in what they did against Virginia Tech or even last week against Pitt. The Alex Bars injury at left guard was significant. He was the captain up front and a great leader, and he did a really good job, as Jesse was talking about, in the run game, and brought that physicality. I think that the replacement, a veteran guy, they're going to get better and better with that offensive line. But let's face it, their margin of error, because of the style of their offense, and even though Ian Book's been great, it's not like these other teams that spread you out and throw it 45 or 50 times a game. It's a different old school style where they're balanced. They need to run the ball. They need to have play action. And they need to play great defense. So because it's a little bit of a different way of going about it, they're going to have games where they don't necessarily have the fastball working, and it doesn't look as pretty as some of these other teams that can throw it around and score in a minute 23. So I haven't lost any confidence in who I think they are, Joey. I just think that they, after, as Reese said, they had a few emotional weeks. They went into this game, everybody's telling them they're in the playoff, they're playing Pitt. I just don't think they had the heater working, and it almost caught up to them, but they were lucky to survive.
Yeah, and as crazy as it may sound, I think I feel a little bit better about Notre Dame after that game. It's the first time since Ian Book has been there that we've seen him go into the fourth quarter without a lead. And so it's been easy, and it's been exciting to watch. Hey, this Notre Dame team, they're terrific. They'll win out. They'll go undefeated. They'll get in the playoff. You hear a lot of people say a team will take a loss, and it'll be something that'll wake a team up. I've never subscribed to that. I don't believe it. But I do believe if you have a close win, it wakes a team up. The fact that they won the game and they got a wake-up call to say, hey, we better bring our A game every single time we take the field to win football games, I think is good for Notre Dame. And just like Clemson, when we look at their schedule, and I know you guys think USC is getting better, I'm still not confident in that. I think that every game on their schedule is very winnable, and so a wake-up call against Pitt will make them get refocused and win the rest of their games.
You know, one of the things we said last week about Notre Dame is, should the Irish make the playoff, that it would leave 2 of the Power 5 conferences out. There's another way that can happen. It happened last year. Conference gets 2 teams in. Playoff predictor, again, giving you the numbers. The SEC, the most likely conference to get 2 teams in. The path to that's pretty clear. A close loss, say, for Alabama in the conference championship game would probably do the trick. And the other conference that I think bears watching is the Big Ten. The Big Ten with an 11% chance, and I think the formula pretty clear there. Close loss by Ohio State to Michigan in the regular season finale, and still the Buckeyes could still make the top 4. Joey, which conference in your judgment is most likely to get 2 teams in the playoff?
easily the SEC. The pathway, because of LSU and what they've done, because of Alabama, what they've done, the Georgia one loss is still sitting there looking pretty good. If they went out and beat an Alabama team in a championship game, then both teams definitely have a chance to get in. The fact that Michigan and Ohio State are both in the East make it a tough path for both teams to get in. I'm not saying it's impossible, but if you're saying to me which conference has the best chance, I think the SEC, simply because they have more teams that are in striking distance of getting to the playoff.
I think that's why, Joey, mathematically it's the SEC, obviously, because of Alabama, LSU, Florida, and Georgia. But I think the most likely scenario is the Big Ten, because I don't think Alabama's losing. I don't think there's another team in the SEC. I think everyone else will at least have 2 losses by the end of the year. So I could see that scenario, especially by the way, in the way Michigan looked this past week, that Michigan beats Ohio State on the road late in a very close game, wins the Big Ten. And if you've got a one-loss Ohio State on the outside looking in, and there's chaos in the Big 12, people start knocking each other off. There's a two-loss champion there. Maybe Clemson loses. Maybe Notre Dame slips up. I think the most likely scenario is Ohio State and Michigan going in.
Yeah, I would have said before last weekend, the Big Ten, because I thought Penn State maybe had a real shot to run the table. Now, after this past weekend, I would say neither conference. I don't think the SEC or the Big Ten or any other conference is going to get 2 in this year. It's just my opinion. If Notre Dame is able to get there, obviously it's a no-brainer. I don't think you're going to see 2. And even if Notre Dame somewhere stumbles along the way and they're left out, I think instead of opening up the door for a second team in one conference, I think it's big news for the Big 12, whether it's Texas or Oklahoma, or possibility, I know it's a long shot, if Oregon were to stay hot and run the table, which is tough, but if they were to run the table, that's the one team that's still hanging on in the Pac-12. So, David, I just don't think it's going to be one of those years where we see 2 teams coming in from one conference.
Hey, can I ask, what was the question, Reese?
Which
Reese, you always let Kirk get away with that stuff. And if Jesse had done it, had David had done it, I just feel like you would have smacked our hand and said, guys, that's not the question. Kirk, whatever you want to do, big fella, just tell us whatever you want.
Well, as seniority carries its privileges, right?
Apparently.
You know what? Now you've challenged me, Galloway. If Herb Street tries to say the Pac-12 is done, time now for our Capital One rewarding performance. Oregon against Washington. Look at this throw that Justin Herbert made. Hit it right in the corner of the end zone. Oregon had to survive a late missed field goal by Washington in regulation, and then Verdell goes in with the game winner, and Oregon won it 30-27, according to ESPN's playoff predictor. You see where the Pac-12 now has still just a 5% chance of sending a team to the playoff. Now, Kirk alluded to the fact that Oregon is just barely hanging on to a playoff hope. Notre Dame sitting there 65%, not in the conference, obviously. But, Kirk, I would submit that I agree with you that Oregon is the best chance, but if Washington State were to beat Oregon, would not the Cougars also have the same opportunity right there to make a late surge and get into the picture?
Yeah. I mean, they cracked the top 25. They'd have a win over Oregon under your scenario if they were able to win that game and continue to stay hot and win out. That'd be a big challenge for them. But you're right. I guess they're still in the mix. Yeah. But I think if you were to look around as trying to find a team that you could possibly find besides Oregon as a long shot, is there any other team that you think's outside of the top 5 that could get up there? I would throw in, we've been talking Michigan and LSU all day. I think those 2 are pretty obvious. I would throw you a curveball and say the Oklahoma Sooners are still in a position to have a shot to get back up and get into the mix and maybe have a shot to get into the Big 12 championship, win that game. And I wouldn't forget about them and write them off just yet.
Yeah, and I tell you what, Oregon, I think, is obviously the best chance for the Pac-12. Because here's another thing, too. Kirk, we saw live, and I think you called the game, but they beat the crud out of Stanford. I mean, they gave the game away. There's no doubt about it, but they definitely gave Stanford all they should handle. Should have won the game. It was a bad loss, no doubt about it. But I think Oregon's found something, and I think they have a chance. This will be a tough challenge after a physical game last week. I think they have a chance to be the Pac-12 representative, and I think they're the only chance, and I think there's a chance with Herbert and how much more physical they are and a better defense than we've seen in the past that they could be the Pac-12's hope, and they could possibly get there. Better than the math says, Joey, because I think our math gives them like a 0.5% for them even making it, but I give them a lot stronger chance than that, for goodness sakes. You and your numbers, Reese.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Hey, Reese, you almost choked up Herbie with that Washington State question. Now, last season, I was on Washington State when they were undefeated, and you guys acted like I was crazy. They're 5-1, and now you want to grab Washington State. Hey, Reese, you're making it tough year in and year out for me to follow the rules if this is the way you're going to treat me. But I'm just, hey. They gave them 5%. I don't know if I even see the 5% out there. You know I would love to jump back on Washington State with you, Reese, but not even this season can I do that. It's just tough. Oregon just doesn't have anything left on their schedule. There's no ranked teams left for them to beat.
I just said if, Joey. If they win. I'm not totally on that bandwagon. I am on the bandwagon to go there for game day. It's going to be a great scene. Jesse, what do you think about this?
I think it's going to be tough for the Pac-12. I think the Washington loss, the Colorado loss this last weekend, too, I think really hurt. I think the problem is the non-conference schedule right now for the one-loss teams. I think you look at Oregon, you look at Washington State and Colorado. The best combined non-conference opponent they've played is Nebraska by Colorado. That's the only Power 5 opponent any of those three teams played in non-conference. Of course, Nebraska right now is 0-6. So if there were a couple teams that went unbeaten, get in the playoff, and there's a couple of slots left, I think if you're comparing a one-loss Pac-12 champion from a resume standpoint, I don't know if it's going to match up against some other Power 5 champs. I think the Washington State team, though, is an interesting scenario. If they run the table and finish with one loss, we all remember that USC game, their one loss. That was the worst refed game that we've seen all year, with targeting calls being made, targeting calls not being made. I just wonder in the committee's eyes, the targeting call that was not made late, that would have given Washington State the ball in a goal-to-go situation with 2 minutes and 40 seconds to go. If that call is made, maybe they win the game. Maybe they're unbeaten right now. I don't know. I just wonder how the committee would approach that. Needless to say, I don't think the Pac-12's chances are great.
Yeah, and that call that you're referring to is the one in which there was a report that said there was undue influence, at least in the eyes of some, in the command center. And snarky people, of which I'm certainly not one, would say that a questionably officiated game in the Pac-12, you know what that means? That means it's Saturday. I'm just kidding, but I'm not snarky.
So
right.
it's a regular season game.
No,
Reese, your Twitter is blowing up. Joey's Twitter, Reese's Twitter, blowing up right now.
It's just a little bit of a joke. Kirk touched on this a little bit. Look at the odds to win the national championship among some of the longer shots. See the favorites running across the bottom of the screen. And this is the point where I would remind you that Ohio State, at this point in the season when they won the national championship in 2014, ranked 13th. Oklahoma in 2015, when they made the playoff, ranked 17th. So you're going to have some long shots make the playoff, and some perhaps even compete for the national championship. UCF, nation's longest winning streak, 19 in a row, Joey, 60-1. You're going to take a long shot to win the championship. Quickly, Joey, give me who it would be.
Michigan can get there. They have their schedule set up with Michigan State. They have Penn State. They have Ohio State. They're going to have a chance to win the Big Ten. Michigan is definitely within striking distance of not only getting there, but making some noise if they continue to run the ball and play physical on defense.
If I were a guy like the Bear with those odds, I might make my stumble out there to Vegas and put a few of Reese's hundreds down on Oklahoma as a possibility, and also Oregon as a real long shot just for funsies. So those would be the two teams I would pick based on those odds.
For funsies, okay.
I love funsies.
No, I think Oklahoma, too, because Oklahoma has an opportunity. Joey, what you said, you know, they have Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State. That also means that's 3 games that you could lose, so it's very difficult to run that stretch. But if they did, they would put themselves in a great situation. Oklahoma, I think the Big 12, they've already beat Iowa State, who I think is a really good football team. They can avenge their loss to Texas. I don't think West Virginia is as good as we thought they were. Oklahoma State obviously has taken some steps back. So I think Oklahoma 100% has a chance to get back in this.
You guys want to get weird? What about NC State at number 16? We keep forgetting about NC State. What if NC State beats Clemson this weekend? What if?
It's doable. It's doable.
It's totally doable, Pollock. They got
Yes.
the best quarterback in the ACC in Ryan Finley. He can get the ball out of his hands quick, which is a good idea against that
With
pass
those
rush.
guys.
A good receiving group, big physical guys led by Jacoby Myers. I love the way their defense fits the run. Clemson's been great running the ball in recent weeks. If NC State gets the win, look at the rest of their schedule. They're going to be favored the rest of the way. That could be an unbeaten team heading into the college football playoff. Let them drop, boys.
Jesse, you destroyed Auburn last week by saying don't count them out, and now you just killed Davy Doran.
The kiss of death.
Take them out.
You guys are all
death.
picking like the team ranked 7 right now. That's weak.
You know,
You huppies.
Jesse, if NC State wins and if Washington State wins, that'll be weirder than the Halloween game you and I called in Pullman a few years ago, which you got a little weird that
That
night.
was a game, Reese, that was a game Pollock was not at, I remember.
Yes,
Yes,
he
that was not.
Yeah.
That was because I got weird. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, David was not able to join us that week. Week 8 preview coming up. We'll tell you some of the big games, that rivalry game for Michigan. Which one will leave the biggest impact?
By the Home Depot, live from Pullman, Saturday at 9 on ESPN.
217th consecutive game day with Old Crimson, the Washington State flag, and we're going there. That's one of the notable games on Saturday, rivalry game between Michigan and Michigan State. When you look at these games and the rest of the docket, Kirk, what will the headline be next week as a result of these games?
I think the LSU train. This is a big test after an emotional win last week against Georgia. Thankfully for them, it's at home in a night game against Mississippi State defense. It's leading the nation in scoring defense. I think they manage and find a way to win, but it's going to be one of those typical low-scoring games. But I think that LSU train keeps moving forward. But like I said, David, I think it'll be a hard-fought game.
Brutal. I mean, you think about what they've gone through the last 3 weeks, LSU. I mean, that's just, it's crazy. If they,
Just
I
keep
mean,
coming. Just keep
I
coming.
don't know how they have their fastball, but I tell you what, I think the Ducks are going to continue to quack on as much as we're going to enjoy our trip to Washington State. I think it's going to be an awesome atmosphere. I think it's going to be amazing. Old Crimson will be out, Kirk. I'm sure you'll be giving the fans something to cheer about. But I think the Ducks are going to be quack, 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 Mr. Ducksworth.
Kirk, I'm with you.
That's
I
not
want to
cool
see
at all,
LSU
dude.
after an emotional win. I also want to see Michigan after an emotional win against Wisconsin. And now they're going to play Michigan State, one of their rivals, so they'll have to get up again. So those are the games I was looking forward to. But the way Jesse's selling NC State, that might be the game to watch
in,
it the whole
Joey.
weekend.
Get in.
You don't want to miss the eventual
Get in
national
there.
championship. NC State, the Wolf. Hey, I'm in, Jess. You sold me. I'm in.
Oh, yeah, I mean, like, you over here, Joey, you guys are all about, like, soft money and easy bets. I'm trying to get out on a limb here and try to help you guys out. I'm helping Joey on UFC, and I got to help him on this now. This is unbelievable. Guys, I can't wait to see Michigan State. I think it's at noon this Saturday. It's going to be awesome. Maybe find out the last team on Ohio State's schedule that can give them a run. Michigan State, real emotional late game win against Penn State on the road. A game that not a lot of people gave them a chance, but Michigan's rush offense against that run defense and their physicality, that is such a good matchup to watch. I can't wait.
There'll probably be unexpected upsets, although last week seemed to corner the market on those. Maybe the headline will be the old Cougars starting to sneak around the chicken coop, depending on how they do against the Ducks on Saturday. For Kirk and Joey, David and Jesse, I'm Reese Davis. Thanks for joining us 2 weeks away from the first college football playoff rankings coming. Straight ahead right now, the United States against Peru in soccer. We'll see you next week.